Chapter 11, My Wedding Day. We decided to get married right away. We wanted to have a simple wedding. No bridesmaids, no groomsmen, no relatives or guests. No preparations needed to be made. We set the date within a month. Those were happy days before my wedding. And yet, every single night I had nightmares when I went to sleep. It was always the same dream. Thornfield Hall lay in ruins. Only the outer walls were standing. The roof had crumbled and the windows gaped, black and horrifying like empty sockets in a skull. The night before my wedding, a feeling of dread woke me up. I did not remember the dream I'd had. It was the middle of the night. I thought about how strange it was that there seemed to be light in the room. It was a dim light, such as a small candle gives out. I thought that Sophie, the maid, had come in. I called out, "Sophie, is that you?" And no one answered. I sat up in my bed so I could see around me better. My blood turned cold, and it was all I could do not to scream. A tall figure, holding a candle in its hand, was standing by my closet. Its height, its shape, did not remind me of any servants. I knew it was a stranger. Slowly, it turned its face to me, stared at me with wild, blazing eyes, and started walking towards my bed. I could now see it was a woman. She was wearing a long, white gown that looked like a shroud. Her hair was loose, thick, black, and wild, tangled and matted, as if it had been soaked in mud or blood that was now dry. Her face was bloated and had a black-purple color like a bruise. She rolled her eyes and grinned, baring long yellow teeth, then walked past the bed to the window. She drew the curtain, looked out a moment, let the curtain fall, and turning around towards me again, blew out the candle. I could no longer see her in the darkness, but I could hear her footsteps move to the door, then out the room and down the long corridor that led to the stairway. It wasn't a dream, reader. In the morning, when I got up, I saw drops of wax on the floor, by the window and in front of the closet. It upset me greatly. When I put my wedding gown on, I looked worried and pale, but I managed to push the incident out of my mind. It was a beautiful, clear day. We took the carriage to the village church, then walked hand in hand through the churchyard. We had wanted no guests, not even Mrs. Fairfax or Adele, so I expected the church to be totally empty. I was surprised to see two men standing by the last pew. Mr. Rochester was so happy and absorbed that he did not notice them. I thought nothing of it. They were strangers. I assumed that they had entered the church not knowing a wedding was about to take place, and had decided to stay and watch. When the service began, the clergyman issued the usual statement. "I require and charge you both that if either one of you know any impediment why ye may not be joined together in matrimony, ye do now confess it." He paused, as it is customary, turned his face towards Mr. Rochester, and opened his lips to say the next line, "Wilt thou have this woman for thy wedded wife?" when a loud voice from the back of the church said, "The marriage must be stopped." The clergyman stared at the man who had spoken. Mr. Rochester did not turn back to look at the man. He seemed to have recognized the voice. His face had become bright red. "Go on with the ceremony," he said to the priest. "I cannot," said the clergyman. "Let this man come forward and explain his reason for interfering." "The marriage cannot take place because Mr. Rochester is already married," the man said. "I am his wife's brother. The gentleman with me is my solicitor. He can show you the marriage deed and proof that Mrs. Rochester is alive and living in Thornfield Hall, where Mr. Rochester proposes to take his new bride." "That is impossible," the clergyman said. "I have lived in this village for years, and I have never heard of a Mrs. Rochester living at Thornfield Hall." "She's been locked up like a prisoner in the attic," the solicitor said. "We can produce a witness, Grace Poole, the servant who is paid to be her keeper." Oh, reader, you can imagine my horror and grief. Suddenly the crazy laughter, the fire, and the apparition last night in my room made sense. I ran out of the church, and Mr. Rochester ran after me. Like a wild man, he grabbed me, pushed me into the carriage, and told the driver to take us home. "You want to see my wife?" he asked. "I'll show you my wife." I was too horrified to say a word. When we got to Thornfield Hall, he grasped my hand and pulled me after him up the stairs. He knocked savagely at the attic door. Grace Poole opened up. "How are you, Mrs. Poole?" he said. "Tolerably well," Mrs. Poole said. A blood-curdling scream came from the back of the attic, and the woman I had seen in my room rushed at Mr. Rochester, with her arms stretched out in front of her, as if she meant to strangle him. Mrs. Poole held her back. "That is my wife," Mrs. Rochester said. Mr. Rochester said. I ran downstairs, shut myself in my room, and took off my wedding dress. I was too shocked to weep. I was too shocked to feel anything. I changed back into my governess's dress and sat down on my bed. What was I to do? I still loved him. I loved him all the more, now that I understood that he must have suffered all these years, hiding such a terrible secret. I have to do the right thing, I thought. I have to leave. I cannot stay, because I love him. I want to be in his arms. I felt calm and strong, once I had made up my mind. I left my room quietly and went looking for him. He was in the library. When he saw me, he jumped up from his armchair and walked up to me, looking me in the eyes with despair. "You must believe me, Jane," he said. "I did not mean to hurt you." "I know, sir." "Do you forgive me, Jane?" There was such love on his face, there was such grief and remorse in his eyes, that I almost forgave him in my heart, though I did not say the words. "You think I'm a scoundrel?" he asked. "Yes, sir." "Say it, then, say it! Curse me, I deserve it." "I cannot, sir." "You still love me, then? You still want to be my wife?" "You know I cannot be your wife, sir. You have a wife." "That mad creature," he said. "You call that mad beast a wife?" "In the eyes of God, she is. It's not through a fault of her own that she's mad. You shouldn't talk of her with such hatred. She cannot help what she is or what she does." "You know nothing about it," he said. "I should hate her. I do hate her. She was hateful before she came mad. She was immoral. She was evil." "You must have known that when you married her, sir." "I was deceived. I was duped into marrying her. My own father, my own brother deceived me." He told me then that his father and his brother had conspired to cheat him out of his inheritance. They sent him off to the West Indies to stay with a family friend who was extremely wealthy and had a single daughter. They knew that the girl's mother had been mad and that the girl had inherited her sickness, but they concealed this fact from him and urged him to marry the girl. Once he married her and had use for her large fortune, he would make no claims on Thornfield Hall. The girl was clever, high-spirited, and extraordinarily beautiful. Some of her odd behavior seemed no more to be than a more temper. Mr. Rochester fell in love with her and agreed to marry her and stay in the West Indies, as had been his brother and father's wish. Love blinded him at first. As soon as the honeymoon was over, though, he realized his mistake. Gradually, her behavior towards him changed. She started treating him with indifference and then contempt. She had violent outbursts of rage. With time, they became so frequent that no servant could tolerate to work in the house. She seemed to like the disarray and filth. She insulted him in public and used foul language in front of the guests. He was about to start divorce papers when he found out that his mother-in-law, who he had been led to believe was dead, was in fact alive and confined to a mental institution. The doctors told him that his wife suffered from the same mental illness, and it would only get worse. Now he knew he could never divorce her. It would be dishonorable, for his marriage vow had been, "Unto sickness and health as long as I shall live." He was doomed to live with her forever. He felt such despair. In the meantime, his father had died. Then news reached him that his brother had died as well. He could now own Thornfield Hall. He no longer needed to depend on his wife's money. The idea came to him that he could leave and go back to England to live. No one would have to know about his wife. He could take her along, make arrangements that she'd be taken care of at Thornfield Hall, and then he could be free to live his life. "I did just that," he said, "but I was not free. I knew I was living a lie. I knew I could never be a happy man. I knew I did not have the right to love, to marry. Then I met you, Jane. I loved you the minute I set eyes on you. I did not show it. I could not show it. I knew I had no right to show it. But my love grew. For the first time in my life, I understood what true love is. How could I give that up?" I looked away from him. "I know you love me, Jane. Be mine as you promised." "I cannot, sir. I must not." He tried to put his arms around me, but I pushed him away and ran out of the room, afraid that I would give in to him if I stayed one moment longer.